Tonight, please, take my first time. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing golden light over two people who should have never belonged to each other. Lena Mayfield, a black woman marked by a birth stain down her back, turned away by two men before sat trembling, her dark eyes caught between fear and longing. Across from her stood Silas Boone, a widowed cowboy of 43, hardened by a lifetime on the Montana plains. His heart stumbled at her words, then steadied as he gripped her shoulders and whispered like a vow. That mark does not make you less. It makes you one of a kind. In his arms, Lena wept, not tears of shame, but release. That night, with the prairie winds howling outside, they crossed the boundary and gave each other more than flesh, trust, passion, and salvation. Yet in the distance, shadows waited. Would their fire burn strong enough to drive back the dark? They say a soul afraid of love is no different than one afraid of death. For love, like death, demands surrender, pride, dignity, or the last fragile thread of trust. Lena Mayfield knew this truth better than most. Her fear was not of living or dying, but of the cold sting of being turned away, looked down upon, abandoned once a man saw her whole self. That August afternoon, the stagecoach rattled from Billings to Crow's Bend, wheels grinding over red dust roads under a blistering Sunday. Montana dirt rose in clouds, coating Lena's dress in a thin, dry film. When the coach pulled up before the wooden saloon, the whole town seemed to hold its breath. For weeks they had whispered of Silas Boone, the most stubborn bachelor in the territory, 43 years old, finally sending east for a mail-order bride. The door swung open, and Lena stepped down. A black woman, slight in build, worn brown shoes, a bonnet shadowing half her face. Hidden beneath her dress was a birthmark that stretched from shoulder to waist. It caused no pain, yet had driven two men to abandon her when cloth slipped and skin showed. Since then, Lena had buried her hopes of ever being looked upon with gentleness. But today, she stood here. The crowd pressed close on the wooden boardwalks, parasols raised, fans stirring, whispers cutting sharp as wind. She looks too small. 43, and he brings home a girl like that? Dark as coal, frail as a reed. She won't last a season on a ranch. Lena heard it all, but her face stayed calm. Only her gloved hands clenched tighter around the strap of her bag. Silas Boone stood beside the coach, broad-shouldered, shirt faded with wear, his frame carved by years of sun and work. His hair was streaked with gray, his face darkened by weather, his brown eyes hard as iron. He had lived long without a woman's laughter, knowing only cattle, wind, and the sound of hooves. Now he stood silent, eyes narrowing with a flicker of disappointment. He had wanted a wife strong and sturdy, fit for ranch work without complaint. Instead, before him was a fragile figure, thin and weary, hair tied quick beneath a worn bonnet. Lena drew a breath and stepped down. Her heel slipped on the coach step. She staggered, hand gripping wood for balance. Laughter rippled through the crowd, mixed with jeers. Silas did not move to steady her. His arms hung at his sides. She bit her lip, righted herself, then lifted her chin. Her black eyes shone with challenge. "You are Silas Boone." Her voice was steady, sharp. "I am." His reply was rough, dry as parched earth. "Then I am Lena Mayfield, the woman you called here from the east. Let me tell you plain. I carry a birthmark across my back. If that disgusts you, turn away now. I will not beg any man to keep me." The town fell silent. Whispers cut off, leaving only the shuffle of restless hooves in the dust. Silas's brow furrowed, jaw locked. In his eyes flickered not contempt, but the sting of being forced to choose in front of all. "Your letters said nothing of this." His voice was gravel. Lena shrugged, calm as if confessing a trifle. Not everything worth shame finds its way onto paper. I told you if you don't want me, I'll walk away. No one will blame you. That composure drew a few sharp breaths from the women watching. A widow behind her fan muttered. Silas gave no answer. He only hefted her trunk down from the coach. The sound of wood hitting boards like a gunshot. My place is at the end of this road, he said, curt, eyes fixed on Lena, as if testing how much she could bear. She gave a thin smile, not joy, but a mask over pain. Then let's go, Mr. Boone. They walked out from the circle of stairs, the man hard as stone, the woman slight but unbending. Wind tore at her dress. Red dust cloaked the street, but Lena kept her back straight beneath the weight of every gaze. She knew the true battle of her life had only just begun. The stagecoach rolled slowly out of town, leaving behind the stares, the whispers, and the faint echo of scorn on the boardwalk. The red dust road stretched toward the hills, where late sunlight poured gold across the withered grass. Lena sat stiff beside her bag, clutching it close. Silas Boone held the reins tight, eyes fixed forward, as if her presence were nothing more than freight to be delivered. No word of welcome, no glance to see that she trembled, breath shallow from the long journey. Between them hung a silence, drawn taut as wire, ready to cut anyone who dared break it. Nearly an hour passed before the ranch rose in sight. Larger than Lena expected, a two-story house standing firm on the slope. A long porch out front, with small flower boxes bright against the wood. Her heart gave a brief stir, perhaps here life might begin anew. But when the heavy door swung wide, that small hope cracked apart. Silas led her through a wide parlor with a stone hearth, past a kitchen sharp with the scent of wood smoke. By a closed door, she guessed was his own. Without pause, he walked on to the narrow hall and stopped at the very end. This is your room. He dropped her trunk to the floor, the weight thudding through the boards. Lena looked around. Bare walls, a narrow bed, a washstand, one small window that opened only onto the chicken yard. Damp straw and the sour smell of hens drifted through the cracks. She bit her lip. The place felt less like a wife's chamber than a space set aside for a lodger or a burden. Dinner at 6, breakfast at 6. Don't be late. His voice was dry as grit. He turned, boots striking the floor, fading down the hall. The door closed. She was left alone with the strangeness. That first night, Lena lay on the narrow bed, eyes tracing the dust-laden ceiling. The wind moaned through the rafters. Coyotes cried out from the far fields, and the sounds pressed down like loneliness itself. Old memories rose unbidden. The first time, 19 years old. A black boy from her street. Gentle face, eyes full of longing. They met in secret, fingers touching beneath the oak. One night she dared to lift her dress, to show the birthmark across her back. His gaze turned to horror. He stepped back, shaking his head, and vanished into the dark. She wept herself raw, but he never came again. The second time, 23. A white carpenter who once called her beautiful, who spoke of marriage. Under lamplight, when cloth slid from her shoulders, his curse cut deep. He called her a monster and slammed the door. That wound hardened into a vow. Never again would she hand her heart to be mocked. Now, in the room at the hall's end, the cold of rejection pressed on her once more. Silas had not seen the mark, yet the suspicion in his eyes stung just the same. Lena touched her back, the rough skin ridged beneath her fingers. Each time she felt it, shame rose like a stone on her chest. Tears slipped to the pillow. She allowed herself 5 minutes of weakness. Then she sat upright. Number. Her whisper cut the silence. I did not cross half the country to weep in this room. Not again. Moonlight spilled across her face through the window. setting her eyes alight with a spark. The night's true climax came not in quarrel, but in quiet resolve. She sat straight, hands gripping the quilt, whispering a vow only she would hear. I will prove I am not a burden. I will show him and myself that I belong here. Outside, the hens clucked restless in the yard. Wind slid straw-scented air through the cracks. But in her chest, for the first time in years, fear gave way to something else. The imagined smell of warm bread, the sound of laughter in a kitchen, the thought of brown eyes watching her with something more than doubt. At last, she lay down. Sleep came late, but when it came, it carried the vision of a porch alight with evening glow, voices of kin around her, and a man's gaze softened by something she had never dared to expect. Tomorrow would be cold again. Yet tonight she smiled in her sleep. A promise had been planted. And from that seed, something would rise, though the soil be the harsh earth of Montana. The rooster's cry split the dawn like a trumpet call across the prairie. Thin sunlight slipped through the cracks of the wooden boards, casting a pale glow over Lena's narrow room. She opened her eyes, taking a moment to remember where she was, the last room at the end of the hall, its window opening onto the chicken yard, the damp smell of straw drifting in. She sat up, smoothed her tangled curls, and pulled on the blue calico dress she had washed carefully before the journey. The small, cloudy mirror on the washstand showed a face with dark circles beneath the eyes. Yet in those eyes burned a steady resolve. Today would be the first morning of her new life. She would walk out, not as a parcel set aside, but as a wife. Lena drew a breath and stepped into the hall. The boards creaked softly under her weight, the echo of boots somewhere ahead. When she reached the kitchen, the strong scent of coffee filled the air. Silas Boone sat at the head of the long table, one hand on his fork, the other tapping a dull rhythm against the wood, his gaze fixed on a plate of eggs. She paused only a moment before seating herself at the far end, leaving enough space between them to park a wagon. "Good morning," she said. Silas lifted his head briefly. His dark eyes, cold as river stone, flicked toward her, then dropped back to his plate, as if the state of his eggs demanded more care than answering. Lena smiled faintly to cover the sting. She poured herself a cup from the green enamel pot, took a sip, and nearly coughed. Bitter as gall, strong enough to scrape her throat raw. The air grew heavy. Only the scrape of cutlery and the wind through the window broke the silence. Lena sat straight, hands wrapped around the cup to steady herself. She knew if she let the quiet stretch, the space between them would harden into a wall too high to climb. "Mr. Boone," she said gently but clear, "I noticed the garden out back. It could use tending. I used to grow tomatoes and squash where I lived. If you'd allow, I could see to it." Silas stopped chewing for an instant. His eyes rose, cold as glacier water. "No need. I didn't hire you for work." The words fell flat and heavy. Lena pressed her lips together, lowered her head a moment, then lifted it again, her eyes glinting with a sly spark. "Oh, of course. I only thought I might be more useful than those hens out there." The remark slipped out light as a pin, but sharp enough to puncture the thick silence. Silas froze half a heartbeat, surprise flickering across his face. He was not used to women answering back, and never in such a tone, half mocking. Their eyes met then, his hard stare locked with the deep black of hers. Lena did not look away. Though her heart thudded quick, she held the faint smile at her lips. Silas blinked, his shoulders tightening. Then he bent back over his plate, fork scraping hard against the eggs, as if grinding silence into dust. Lena turned back to her cup, swirling the dark liquid slowly. Inside, she knew she had gained a small ground. He had been startled, unsettled, and in a crack, however small, a seed might be sown. The meal ended without another word. Silas rose, carried his plate to the sink, rinsing it with such force that water splashed wide. He tugged his hat low, and the door slammed behind him, leaving Lena alone in the vast kitchen. She sat a while longer, eyes fixed on the empty space where he had been. Her pulse still raced, not from fear, but from the sense that something had begun. A new day had come to the ranch, and Lena Mayfield meant to meet it as herself, head high, no waiting for pity. That noon, summer sun spilled like honey across the porch. In the wide kitchen, Lena stood over a steaming pot, sleeves rolled high, her face flushed from the heat. This was the first meal she would set before the ranch hands, and in her heart, though unspoken, she knew it was a test. Footsteps thundered on the porch. The door swung open, and 3 men filed in. At their head was Clovis Redden, 35, tall and sturdy, brown hair brushing his collar, his beard neatly trimmed. Dust clung to his hands from the horse stalls, yet his voice carried a warmth that softened the air. "Afternoon, ma'am." Behind him came Tobin, young and grinning, eyes darting at Lena with bold but harmless mischief. "Place feels brighter today," he teased, breaking the weight in the room. Last was Langdon Croft Broad, rough-hewn, sparing with words. He tipped his head politely. "Ma'am." Lena greeted each in turn, her face calm though her pulse quickened. She ladled the stew, setting bowls on the table. The men dipped their spoons, and after the first taste, they exchanged glances. Then Clovis chuckled low. "Mercy," he said, gray-blue eyes lighting. "Best meal I've had since I set foot in Montana." Tobin whooped. "Cook like this every day and I'll never leave this ranch." Even Langdon gave a solemn nod. Lena's smile came unbidden, softening her tired face. For years she had known only pity or scorn. Today, among weathered men, she heard simple praise, and it rang truer than gold. At the far end, Silas Boone ate in silence. He chewed slow, his eyes unreadable. But when Clovis leaned close to ask for another piece of cornbread, Lena caught a shadow pass across Silas's face. His features stayed hard, but his brown eyes betrayed it, a flicker of jealousy, sharp and swift as a hawk's wing. Later that afternoon, Lena carried blankets to dry in the Sunday. The fields glowed under the long light, the wind thick with hay and dust. As she pinned cloth to the line, her thoughts wandered back to that strange look in Silas's eyes. Clovis came striding by, hammer in hand. He paused, swept off his hat, and spoke in a tone plain and kind. "Ma'am, I owe you thanks for dinner." Ranch hands aren't easy to please, but today they were near speechless. Lena smiled. "It's just a knack. Back home, I cooked for everyone." She meant to say more, but a wave of dizziness hit. The pin slipped from her fingers, her vision dimmed, and her body swayed. "Careful." Clovis caught her arm, his strong hand steadying her, his arm slipping behind her back to keep her upright. He leaned close, voice low and gentle. "Stand still a bit. Breathe deep." The warmth of his hand sent her spinning further, yet she forced a faint smile. "I'm fine, only a little tired." From the porch steps came the sound of boots. He had come from the stables, shirt dust-stained, sweat marking his collar. His eyes fixed hard on the sight. Clovis's hand braced against her arm, his face near hers, her weight leaning against him. Silas's jaw tightened. His fist closed around a leather glove. In his eyes, a flash like steel drawn quick. Clovis stepped back at once, hands raised. She felt faint. "I only helped." Silas gave no word. He walked slow, gaze burning at the hand that had just touched his wife. Lena steadied herself, breath ragged, and whispered, "I'm all right now. Truly." Still, he said nothing, the dark in his eyes heavy with unspoken anger. He turned inside, shoulders rigid, boots striking hard against the boards. Clovis exhaled, muttering low enough for her alone. "Boss, don't take kindly to another man looking after his wife. Pay it no mind." Lena nodded, but her heart thudded fast. Not from faintness, but from what she had glimpsed in Silas's gaze. Fury, yes, but threaded with something else. Concern. That night, she sat at the window of her room at the hall's end, staring out at the chicken yard. The curtain shifted in the night breeze. In her ears lingered Tobin's laughter, Langdon's nod of approval, Clovis's steady kindness. Yet deeper than all, it was Silas's eyes she could not shake. He could act cold, he could set her apart as burden. But in that brief flare of anger, Lena knew he was not indifferent. And with that knowledge, a fragile smile touched her lips. The smile of a woman who sensed that in soil, thought barren, a seed had begun to sprout. Lena opened her eyes to a room she did not know. No longer the narrow chamber with its window over the chicken yard, but a wide space, oak walls polished, a hearth glowing with embers. For a moment she lay bewildered. Then she realized this was Silas Boone's room. She shifted, and her breath caught. The blue calico dress she had worn that morning was gone. In its place hung a loose white nightdress, soft against her skin. Her hand trembled as she touched the cloth, heat flooding her face. Who had changed her clothes? The door creaked open. Silas stepped in, carrying a basin of water and a folded cloth. He halted when he saw her awake. For an instant his dark eyes softened, then quickly returned to their usual steel. Lena pressed her lips together, voice shaking. "This dress?" Silas set the basin down, turning squarely toward her. "I changed it. Thought you'd rest easier." Her face burned hotter. Her throat closed dry. She stammered. "But you—" His voice cut through hers, low and rough. "You're my wife. Dressing my wife is no sin. Is it?" The words struck clean, slicing doubt to the bone. Lena froze, her heart hammering. Since she had crossed this threshold, never once had Silas spoken of her as wife. Stranger, burden, mistake, yes, but not wife. One word, and her whole body shivered. She dropped her gaze, trying to hide the flush creeping to her ears. Yet another thought chilled her. If he had changed the dress, then he had seen the great birthmark that scarred her back, the mark that had driven two men to recoil, to leave her humiliated and alone. Her chest tightened. A question rose like a cry, though she dared whisper it only in her heart. "Do you fear me? Do you find me foul, as the others did?" Slowly, her eyes lifted. She searched his face for a flicker, any trace of disgust. Silas stood with arms crossed, calm as ever, as though what he had done was simple necessity. No revulsion, no grimace, not even the twitch of unease. And that steadiness unsettled her more than any insult. Her thoughts tangled shame and relief, dread and hope colliding. She waited for judgment, bracing for the blow. But none came. Silence swelled. Only the fire cracked in the hearth. Lena clutched the quilt tight around her shoulders, her cheeks aflame, her heart a storm. And in that heat of shame, she felt it a truth dawning like a slow flame. Perhaps the fear that had ruled her life, the fear of being seen whole, was no longer so fearsome after all. Silas sat down beside the basin. A white cloth draped across the rim. He rubbed the back of his neck, his broad frame casting shadow across the room. Calloused hands worked against each other. Clumsy, almost like a boy unsure of himself, not the hardened man who had lived half a lifetime on the brutal prairie. "You need rest." His voice came rough and low. woven of worry and anger alike. Don't drive yourself past the breaking point. No one expects you to bleed yourself dry. Lena sat at the edge of the bed, quilt pulled tight across her chest. Her dark eyes lifted, met his. "Mr. Boone," she whispered, "if I do nothing, I'll be nothing but a shadow in this house. You know that better than anyone." Silence fell, heavy as ash. Then his voice cut through, sure and unyielding. "Turn your back. Lower the dress. I'll help you wash." The words froze the air. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to pause. Lena sat rigid, shoulders weighted, eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment she thought she had misheard. But Silas remained there, face burning, hands clenching the cloth, unwilling to take his words back. At last she nodded. Slowly, he dipped the cloth into the warm water. Droplets fell steady against the floorboards. He dragged the chair closer, the wood creaking as he sat behind her. Her fingers trembled as she slipped the nightdress low from her shoulders. Thin, pale skin stretched over fragile bone, and beneath the lamplight the birthmark spread dark and plain across her back. The mark that had haunted her since birth. The mark that had driven two men to turn away in horror, leaving her broken in shame. Silas said nothing. He only pressed the warm cloth gently to her skin. The first touch sent a shiver through her, sharp as lightning down the spine. Heat soaked into flesh. His rough hand guided the cloth with slow care, steady and patient, not flinching, not rushing. The cloth moved along the length of the birthmark, as if it were no different than any other part of her. Her breath came fast, uneven. She shut her eyes, fingers clawing lightly at the sheets to hold back tears. Then his voice came, deep and close behind her neck. "Turn around." She froze. The room held its breath with her. Still, she sat unmoving, stone in her shame. The soft sound of the cloth laid down on the table finally urged her. With halting care, she turned. Her slender frame stood revealed in the lamplight. She bowed her head, hands trembling against the fabric bunched at her thighs, yet she did not lift it higher. Silas swallowed, his throat working. His gaze lingered, no longer cold but conflicted desire and sorrow bound together with something near reverence. He picked up the cloth once more and traced it gently along the curve of her chest, over skin that quivered beneath each stroke. His movements carried no haste, no roughness, only the gravity of a man treating every touch as sacred. The room held only the sound of cloth gliding across skin, her ragged breath, and the pounding of his heart. At last, her voice broke, trembling. "Are you afraid?" His brow drew tight. He paused. "Afraid of what?" "The mark." Her eyes fell, tears brimming. "I know it's ugly. Others ran from it. I don't blame them. But I must ask." The fire snapped in the silence. Silas set the cloth aside and leaned closer, his dark eyes locking hers. His words came rough but steady. "Number, I'm not afraid." He stopped, then added, each word heavy as stone. "That mark, it makes you different. It takes nothing away. It only proves you're real. No pretending, no hiding." Her eyes blurred with tears. In that moment she was no longer a shadow, no longer a burden. For the first time, a man saw her whole and called her extraordinary. Silas raised his hand, cupped her cheek. His gaze never wavered. And there, with fire blazing in the hearth, two long-lost souls stepped across the line they had held too long. The room glowed gold in the firelight, every flicker catching the lines of their faces, the rise and fall of their unsteady breaths. Lena sat trembling beneath the thin fabric, her dark eyes burning with fear and longing, her hands clutching the sheet as though to steady her courage. At last, as if gathering the strength of a lifetime, she whispered, her voice small yet loud in the space between them. "Tonight, please, Take my first time. The air froze. Silas Boone stiffened, his dark eyes widening, his heart missing a beat. He had not expected such a plea, not from this fragile woman who so often hid herself behind quiet pride. Heat surged through him, fierce and consuming, like fire in his veins. A heavy breath left his chest. His voice came rough, low. I am ready. In that moment, the distance between them shattered. After months of restraint, they rushed together as if breath itself depended on it. Their mouths met in a searing kiss. Desperate, aching, filled with pain, hunger, and redemption all at once. Silas's hands gripped her narrow shoulders, pulling her against the strength of his chest, while Lena wrapped trembling arms around his neck, clinging with sudden ferocity. Their kiss deepened, mingling with the crackle of fire, forming the song of a night too long awaited. Slowly, his hand traced her back, rough palms sliding across the darkened skin where the birthmark spread. She froze, her heart catching in memory 2 times before. That mark had been met with horror, disgust, abandonment. But Silas bent close, his voice like an oath against her ear. This mark does not lessen you. It makes you one of a kind. A hot tear spilled down Lena's cheek. She wept, not with shame, but with release. For the first time, she was seen whole, not shadow, not scar, not burden. Their kiss returned softer now, lingering, reverent. Fabric slipped away in quiet surrender, falling piece by piece until nothing stood between them. Skin met, skin, warm, quivering, alive. They did not rush. Each touch, each breath, carved itself deep, indelible. Silas was strong, yet his roughened hands carried a gentleness she had never known. He moved with care, as though each line of her body was sacred. Lena opened herself, not with fear but with trust, giving wholly, her body and heart laid bare. Their broken breaths, their shivering forms, became the rhythm of a harmony long denied. That night, they gave more than flesh. They gave trust. They gave tenderness. They gave the passion they had held too long inside. Lena was no longer the woman dreading rejection. She was cherished, held as treasure. And Silas, after years of shuttered silence, opened at last, confessing by touch what his heart had hidden. He, too, longed, and he, too, could love and be loved. The fire blazed bright, throwing their entwined shadows high upon the wall. Outside, prairie winds howled wild across the dark, but within the room there was only whisper, kiss, and the rising of 2 souls meeting at last. When the storm of it ebbed, Lena rested in Silas's arms, her tangled hair spread across his chest. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady drum of his heart. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. Her lips moved softly, trembling still. Thank you, for not fearing me. Silas lowered his mouth to her brow, kissed her gently, and murmured, I never saw anything to fear, only a woman brave enough to step into my life. Within that embrace, Lena drifted into sleep, carrying with her the sense that the past was buried, and from this night forward, they truly belonged to one another. Autumn spread gold across the fields around the ranch. On the slopes, the tall grass dried and bent in the chill wind that swept down each evening. For Lena, those days no longer felt like the dark mornings of her arrival. Something had shifted, not loud, not showy, but in small, quiet signs, strong enough to stir her heart. That morning, when she opened the kitchen door, a wild violet lay on the table. No note, no explanation. Only the faint dust on its petals showed it had been plucked from the field behind the house. She smiled faintly, warmth blooming inside. A few days later, on a still evening, Silas came from the stables with an odd gift. In his hand was a wooden spoon, still rough, but the handle bore a carved pattern, a small sunflower. Just something I made in spare time, he muttered, setting it into her palm. Her fingers shook as she traced the uneven lines. No one had ever done such a thing for her. Not for worth, but for care. For the first time in her life, Lena felt not just accepted but claimed part of a place. The next day, when the sun sagged low, Silas carried out a wooden rocking chair and set it on the porch, facing the open fields. Lena stood still, watching as he tested it with a careful push. He scratched his neck, murmuring, "Thought, you might like sitting here come evening." She could not hold back her tears. Each gift was plain, each gesture simple. Yet to Lena, who had lived so long under rejection, they were proof enough. He saw her, not as a shadow, but as his. The hired hands were not men of subtlety, but even they noticed. One noon, when Lena set the stew on the table, Tobin whistled. Food's been tasting better since the boss started leaving flowers in the kitchen. Langdon rumbled a laugh, clapping his shoulder. Or maybe it's that spoon on the shelf. Don't look like anything bought in town. The men burst into laughter, and Lena flushed, bowing her head. But when she lifted her eyes, Silas's gaze met hers, stern yet gentle, saying without words, "Pay them no mind. Let them talk." Clovis did not laugh. He sat silent, his gray-blue eyes fixed on Lena longer than usual. All through the meal he spoke little, and no jest from Tobin or chuckle from Langdon stirred him. His eyes held her, not with anger, but with something weighty, unspoken, restless. In the days after, Clovis grew quieter still. He worked as a foreman should, directing hands, riding the fence lines, repairing rails. Yet each time he passed the porch where Lena often sat in the new rocker, his eyes lingered. Not an idle glance, but one that held sharpness, thought, and questions unsaid. Lena felt it. Each time his gaze brushed hers, her chest tightened. She knew he had seen the signs, the flower, the spoon, the chair. Perhaps he did not approve. Perhaps his silence hid something she dared not name. One afternoon, as she hung quilts in the yard, Clovis came near. He watched her pin the cloth, his hand lifting as if to help, then falling back. "You do too much, ma'am," he said, voice low, stripped of the easy humor it once carried. "The boss has changed, but others still see everything. Don't wear yourself down." Lena looked up, meeting his steady gaze. The gray-blue eyes bore into her, long and searching. The air between them thickened. She folded the last quilt quick, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, Clovis, truly." He nodded, yet his eyes lingered still. That night, Silas returned late. He sat in the rocker, where Lena waited with a thin blanket. Without a word, he reached and drew her close. Under the pale moonlight, she leaned against his shoulder, her heart both steady and aching. She did not know that in the shadows of the yard, Clovis had paused, his eyes watching, silent, before turning away. And the night wind carried across the prairie, mingling with the faint scent of wildflowers Silas had left on the kitchen table that morning. The sky that night churned with black clouds, thunder rolling like iron across the mountain's spine. Wind screamed against the ranch, rattling the wooden frame until it groaned. The hands rushed to drive cattle into shelter, latching doors against the gale. In the chaos, Lena lingered in the backyard, gathering clothes from the line, and was caught. A figure lunged through the rain, holding a tarp against the blast. Clovis. His hair clung wet to his brow, his gray-blue eyes flaring bright in the lightning. "Let me help," he shouted, voice cutting through the storm. At first it was only small things, pulling cloth, steadying sleeves. But under the narrow shelter of the eaves, breath came fast, and Clovis leaned close, his words heavy as the storm itself. Lena, I can't hide it anymore. I love you. She froze. Her heart thundered, not with longing but with fear. She shook her head, eyes wide in the rain. Clovis, please, don't say that. I am Silas's wife. You must be careful. But his gaze burned hotter. He doesn't love you. To him, you're just someone to cook, to clean, a shadow in that empty house. Come with me. I'll care for you. I won't let you live cold and starved of affection. The storm howled as if giving voice to his plea. Lena stepped back, shaking her head harder. Don't. I won't hear more. Clovis seized her wrist, driving her against the wet wall. His breath scorched her cheek, his eyes wild. Then he crushed his mouth to hers. No, don't, she cried, struggling, her small hands pushing against his chest. But his grip tightened. The sound of fabric tearing split the night. Harsher than thunder, her thin dress ripped at the breast, cloth falling loose. Lena sobbed, pleading through the rain. Please, stop. His hands dragged the dress from her shoulders. And then he froze. Lightning split the yard, bearing the birthmark sprawling across her back, dark and unhidden. His hands dropped. His breath staggered. In his eyes flickered fear. Lena collapsed, clutching the torn dress to her chest, rain and tears mingling down her face. In that moment, bootsteps pounded behind. Silas, his body drenched, black hair plastered with water, brown eyes blazing like fire through the storm. His voice thundered louder than the sky. What do you think you're doing? Before Clovis could answer, Silas struck. His fist cracked against the man's jaw, sending him crashing to the mud. Another blow followed. Then another, each one the weight of fury, jealousy, and anguish at the sight of his wife violated. Silas, stop! Lena's scream tore through the storm. He halted, chest heaving, rage still burning in his eyes. Clovis lay in the mud, blood seeping from his lip, groaning faintly. Silas turned. Lena crouched, clutching the ragged cloth, her whole body trembling, face drowned in tears. He dropped to his knees, wrapping her tight in his arms. His soaked body shielded her shaking frame. Don't be afraid, he whispered, his voice rough, fierce. I'm here. She broke, sobbing hard against his chest. Her hands clung to his shirt like lifelines. He held her tighter, lifting her as if she weighed nothing, unwilling to let another man touch her again. Through the pounding rain, he carried her back toward the ranch, each step steady, relentless. Above, the heavens raged. But in his arms, Lena knew she was safe. The storm still howled outside, rain slashing against the windows as though it meant to sweep the world away. But inside the ranch, the oil lamp flickered. The hearth snapped and hissed, casting light over two drenched figures as they entered the parlor. Silas bent low, setting Lena gently onto the worn leather sofa. Her torn dress clung to her shivering skin. His eyes darkened as his rough hand brushed the ripped fabric. His voice came low, ragged. Let me help you. He drew the cloth aside. The rent fabric fell loose, revealing raw red marks. Without another word, Silas dipped a towel into warm water and began to wipe away the storm's traces. Rain, mud, the dirt that clung to her shoulders, her neck. Lena caught his wrist, her voice breaking like a plea. Silas, help me wash away. His touch, her eyes, black and wet with tears, begged him. Silas froze, his jaw tightening. In that instant, he knew. This was not just cleansing the body. It was erasing shame, scouring away a wound carved into her soul. Without pause, he stripped off his own soaked clothes, shirt heavy with rain, boots caked in mud. Standing tall, he came close, his breath hot against her chilled skin. Lena shrank back slightly, clutching the blanket, eyes wide yet fixed on him. "Trust me," he whispered, voice thick and hoarse. With one firm motion, he eased her back against the sofa. Their breaths mingled, harsh and uneven. He bent down, his lips tracing each place another hand had dared defile, each kiss a fierce vow. Only me. Only us. Silas was no longer the silent, distant man she had known. He was like a beast, defending its own, burning to reclaim what had been threatened. His touch came urgent, insistent, as though to crush the memory of Clovis from her flesh. Lena bit her lip, tears spilling but no longer tears of despair. These were tears of release, of safety, of being held so fiercely that no fear could enter. "You're angry?" she gasped between breaths. His eyes flamed as he stopped, voice rough as gravel. "Angry that any man thought to touch you. Angry that you trembled in pain. But with me, Lena, you are never shame. You are mine." He kissed her harder, more desperate, each press of his mouth striking against the places where her dress had been torn. Each kiss a hammer, breaking Clovis's shadow to dust. Lena let the blanket fall, her arms circling his neck. Her sobs turned to a cry of answer. She yielded, her body softening under his strength, no longer resisting, no longer afraid. Outside, thunder split the night. Inside, two bodies clung tight in firelight, fierce, trembling, yet bound by something deeper than desire. His words came ragged at her ear. "Tonight, I'll wipe it all away. There will be only us." What followed burned fierce, not with rage now, but with love unchained. Every movement spoke both hunger and tenderness, a storm of flame that consumed her pain and planted new trust in its place. When at last it was done, Lena lay spent in Silas's arms, her tangled hair damp with sweat and tears. Yet shame was gone. In its place bloomed the quiet certainty of being cherished, of being saved. Silas pressed his lips to her brow, his voice a vow torn from his chest. "Fear no more. I'm here, always." She closed her eyes, resting against the thrum of his heart. And for the first time, since the storm began, peace found her. Winter struck Montana territory with all its cruelty. Winds poured down from the mountains, clawing at every board of the ranch. Snow fell heavy, burying the world in white, erasing fences, tracks, and the golden fields that only weeks before had glowed with autumn Sunday. In that bitter cold, Lena Mayfield began to sense the change in her body. Many mornings, nausea rose sharp as she opened her eyes. Evenings left her drained, her hands trembling when she held a spoon. At first, she thought it was the weight of work, the storm's terror still haunting her mind. But as she counted the days, her palm rested on her belly once flat, now faintly rounded, and she froze. One morning, with snow blanketing the porch, Lena stepped outside, whispering softly to herself, "My child, you're here, aren't you?" Silas came from the stable, shoulders dusted with snow. He saw her there, black hair gleaming under the pale light, hand pressed to her stomach. At first he feared she was unwell and rushed forward. "Lena, are you all right?" She turned, eyes shimmering with tears. Her voice shook but carried certainty. "Silas, I'm with child." For a heartbeat, the man's broad shoulders seemed locked in ice. He looked at her, then at the hand resting over her belly, and the brown eyes that had known only hardness, lit like flame. His words came hoarse, astonished, brimming with joy long buried. "Our child." Lena broke down, falling into his arms, Silas crushed her close, as if fearing the moment would vanish if he let go. In the heart of winter, a new fire blazed life, hope, a gift he had never dared imagine. The news swept through the ranch faster than any wind. Tobin blurted it first at breakfast. Mrs. Boone's carrying a blessing. Soon every hand called her by that name, Mrs. Boone, with a respect stripped of jest. Langdon rumbled. Boss'll be soft as butter for her now. Mark my words. Even Samuel, since that storm-dark night, kept his distance. No lingering stares, only silence. A bowed head when he passed. Lena felt relief, yet sorrow too, for the shadow that seemed to follow him still. The ranch itself brightened. Silas built sturdier fences around the stock, saying, "So the cold won't reach my wife and child." He rebuilt the rocking chair, padding it with soft cotton for Lena's comfort. And each time he said, "Our child," his voice softened, warm as the hearth. But Montana's winters show no mercy. By March, blizzards struck with fury. One evening, the wind wailed at the shutters like wolves. Snow so thick a hand vanished before the eyes. Lena, her belly now rounded, began to feel strange. Pains dull at first, then sharper, running down her back into her belly. That night, as the ranch lay silent but for the storm's roar, Lena gripped the bed frame, sweat pouring despite the frozen air. "Silas," she gasped, her voice trembling. He was by the fire, laying fresh wood, but at her cry, he rushed to her side. He saw her pale face, sweat streaking down, and his eyes darkened. "Lena, is it time?" She nodded, tears spilling. Silas ran to the porch, shouting to Tobin, "Fetch the midwife." But Tobin shook his head, despairing. "Not in this blizzard. Boss, no one can reach the ranch." The wind clawed, snow cutting like knives. Silas stood one moment, then turned, fire blazing in his eyes. He came back to her side, clutching her hand. "Then I'll do it. We have no other choice." The room glowed under the lamp's flame. Lena lay on the bed, panting, her hand crushing his until his fingers blanched. Each wave of pain shook her body, strangling cries in her throat. Silas wiped the sweat from her brow, his voice hoarse, steadying, though it quivered with fear. "You're strong, Lena. Trust me. I won't let you or the child suffer alone." Time dragged endless. Outside, the storm howled. Snow battered the windows as if to break the house apart. Inside, breath tore ragged, cries echoed. The floor creaked beneath Silas's shifting weight. He remembered every foal he had pulled, every calf delivered from a struggling cow. But this was not stock. This was his wife. This was his firstborn. His wide hands shook, but he forced them steady. "Look at me, Lena." He bent close, brown eyes burning. "You're not alone. Do you hear?" She nodded, tears and sweat mingling. The final pain came fierce, tearing through her body. Lena screamed, pouring her last strength into it. Silas gripped her hand tight. And then, at the breaking point, another sound cut through the storm outside. A cry. Thin yet strong. Sharp and new, the cry of life. Silas froze, his great hands trembling as he lifted the small, slick body. "Our child," he whispered, tears falling hot down his weathered face. Lena, spent but smiling, her eyes shining, reached out. "Let me hold our baby." Silas laid the red, wriggling infant in her arms. Lena pressed the child close, her heart blazing even in the storm. Outside, wind screamed and snow clawed. But within the small room rose a sound stronger than all the steady cry of a newborn. and the joined heartbeats of two souls who had found each other against the odds. Silas sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his broad hand brushing the child's tiny head. "Our family," he whispered, eyes blurred with tears. "From now on, nothing will part us." The blizzard still raged beyond. But within the ranch, a new life had begun. The storm at last gave way. Morning light slipped through frost-clouded windows, and the ranch no longer shuddered under snow and wind. In its place lay silence. A strange silence only those who had brushed death could know. A deep thankfulness for breath, for life. In the bedroom, still scented of burnt wood from the hearth, Lena lay upon the bed, her sweat-damp hair clinging in dark strands to her cheeks. Against her chest, the tiny child stirred, releasing a faint hiccup like the chirp of a newborn bird. Silas sat close, one arm braced around his wife, the other cradling the child as if it were a treasure too fragile to hold. The oil lamp still glowed faintly, casting a haze that painted them like a portrait. There was weariness, the marks of storm, but above all, a peace rare and pure. Silas stared at his son with disbelief. A man whose life had been dust roads, horse sweat, and solitude now trembled before this small new life. He bent low, kissing the fine down of the child's hair, whispering, "Samuel Boone, you are our miracle." At the name, Lena smiled faintly. It was no accident chosen in quiet tribute to a man who once had shielded her, once had believed in her, though weakness and error had undone him. Now, with violence left behind, she wanted only to hold to what kindness the world had offered. In the days that followed, the ranch seemed reborn. Each hired hand greeted her with bowed head. "Mrs. Boone," spoken in tones of respect. Tobin slipped extra bundles of wood by the door. Langdon took on heavier loads, so the boss can have more time with his wife and boy. In their eyes, Lena read a change. She was no longer the burden brought in from the east. She was the heart of the house, mother of a Boone child, wife of a man who had defended her before storm and before men alike. Each evening Silas carried the child to the porch, rocking gently in the chair he had built with his own hands. Lena sat beside them, watching father and son bathed in the gold of dusk, her heart swelling with a sense she had never dared to imagine before, the certainty of belonging. One night, when snow at last ceased to fall, Silas remained in bed, his eyes fixed on Lena nursing their child. The lamplight brushed her dark skin, her weary yet radiant face, and he swallowed hard. "Do you know?" His voice broke, catching, "I never thought I'd have a home like this." Lena lifted her eyes, black and glistening. "And now?" He reached, his hand tracing the birthmark along her back, stroking it like a vow. "Now I know. All I want is here, in this room, with you and our son." Tears welled in her eyes, no longer bitter. She leaned against his shoulder, whispering, "Then we have found each other, haven't we?" He nodded, holding both mother and child tight against his chest. The seasons turned, and Boone's ranch grew into its name with pride. Under the care of the hands and the devotion of Silas, spring brought green fields, fattened herds, and gatherings of neighbors from Crow's Bend. People looked at Lena differently now, not with pity or curiosity, but as a woman standing at Silas's side, child in her arms, proud and calm. Each nod, each "Mrs. Boone," carried acceptance. She no longer flinched if the birthmark showed. She had learned the scar was never the enemy, nor the eyes of others. What was truly fearful was the thought of never boarding that stagecoach long ago. Had she yielded to shame, she would never have known Silas, never cradled this child, never claimed this home. 3 years later, Montana was no longer only the land of hardship in Lena's memory. On the high ridge, Boone's ranch now stood like an oasis of life. Wide fields stretched outward, herds fattened, fences held firm, and on the porch, the laughter of children rang bright, louder than the prairie wind. Samuel Boone, the boy once cradled through that blizzard night, now ran sure-footed across the porch, his dark eyes shining like his mother's. Lena stitched cloth while keeping watch on him, and Silas sat nearby mending a saddle strap, his gaze betraying pride each time it followed the boy's steps. It was not only their family that had changed. Tobin, the young hand once quick with jokes, had married a fair-haired girl from Crow's Bend. Husband and wife often rode to the ranch on weekends, bringing pies and laughter. Lena smiled to see Tobin clumsy with his own baby, while Silas only shook his head, his eyes softened in amusement. Langdon, too, had found a home. The hulking, rough-spoken man had wed a gentle widow from a ranch across the valley. They came with 3 small children, settling near Boone's land. Each evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, the shouts of children from both households mingled, echoing across the fields. Even Samuel Redden, whose shadow had once haunted Lena, had gone. He drifted south, and word reached them he had started a small ranch along the Yellowstone. Sometimes, Lena remembered the heavy look in his eyes. But now, it was only a distant scar, powerless against her present peace. At night, when the spring breeze swept soft across the prairie, the 3 families gathered on Boone's porch. Oil lamps hung high, a long table laid with bread, stew, and the sweet tang of cider. Silas sat at the head, Lena beside him, little Samuel curled in his mother's arms. Tobin spun awkward tales to his new wife. Langdon roared with laughter as the children chased one another across the porch boards. In the lamplight, Lena looked around, her heart gone still with wonder. Once she had feared every eye, believing herself a shadow. Yet now, among these people, she knew the truth. Family was not only of blood, but of bonds, forged by trust, loyalty, and love. Boone's ranch, after all the storms, had been reborn. Not one home but 3 lives woven together, like pieces of a larger tapestry of frontier kinship. And Lena knew that from this point on, no storm could ever sweep away what had been built in love and in courage. That night, the family lay together beneath the glow of the lamp. Silas leaned against the headboard, Lena resting on his shoulder, the infant sleeping on her breast. Outside, spring wind stirred, snow melting into trickling streams. She looked up, watching the light flicker across the face of the man who had walked beside her through darkness, storms, and humiliation. And in that moment she understood a truth she had sought her whole life. The worst fear was never the mark on her back or the world's judgment. The worst fear was never daring to climb aboard that stagecoach, never daring to believe love was worth choosing. With that knowing, Lena closed her eyes, safe in Silas's arms, certain no storm beyond their walls could sweep away the happiness they now held. The lamp cast its golden glow over 3 lives bound together, Silas, Lena, and the child. Outside, snow was gone, leaving only the sound of water running soft as a lullaby. In that harsh frontier, a family had been born not only of blood, but of courage, to face fear and faith that love is worth the risk. The mark upon Lena's back was never a chain. It was a sign, a reminder that true love does not fear. And perhaps it was the stagecoach she once boarded in trembling that had opened a life new and whole, where she was no longer alone, where the Boone name became her pride. If you, too, have known loss, borne shame, or carried fear, believe this: there is always a beginning waiting ahead. What do you think of Lena and Silas's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to hear more Wild West love stories.